It started as a part-time contract, to be fair. Talk about a consultant never leaving. Also, I might add that through that 20 years, there was definitely a rule within the Commission, both from staff and management, that you never let Gary out in public. So this is the first time in 20 years that I've appeared. So let's see what we're going to do. Yeah. I won't do any congratulating either, John. We did the survey. The survey, traditionally we had done a survey of complainants with trying to identify what their satisfaction levels were with our complaint side investigation process as part of our annual reporting of non-financial reporting to Parliament and inside our annual report. And it was always fairly precarious. It started out quite well because we seemed to have skewed the questions to make sure they were satisfied, but over time, the fact that you are leading a complaints jurisdiction means that the chances of satisfaction were pretty much limited to the result that the person themselves got. So I was intent that we should be trying to measure their satisfaction with the process that took place, not the outcome. And we decided that after, I guess, the select committee meeting, which John and I appeared at about 1 week after you were appointed, I think, 3 days after you were appointed, justifying our complaints measurement thing and not quite being able to do that, we decided it would be time to get some specialist advice in and get a consultancy agency, which in this case we decided to use Colmar Brunton. We still had the problem, obviously, of the idea that, you know, if you didn't get the result you wanted, you weren't going to be satisfied and to cloud it. So one of the things that Colmar Brunton came up with was a way of getting it off their chest before we did the survey. So there's elements of it where they can talk and vent and clear the air, and then we identify the questions that we do are related to actually procedural matters rather than the complaint. There's a few stats around there that are up on the screen, but we try to contact all complainants and respondents over a 12-month period. We did use internet access specifically, so that meant that some obviously did not have internet, which I think they say about 23% of households don't. But we had a fairly good response rate, and we're fairly confident in the results that we got. Does it go? Oh, yeah. It came up with a number of things about the most important things of driving satisfaction and the least important, and that was sort of eye-opening in a way. You know, one thing, those of us involved in government, we're all talking all the time about better public services and making access easier. You know, one of the least important ones was the ease of lodging a complaint, for goodness sake. You know, and we would have thought, you know, we've done a lot of work there and we've made that nice and simple. But I guess my argument there is some of these things are taken for granted that it should be easy to lodge a complaint. You're not doing anything special, you're doing what you should be doing. So I'll take some credit that it's still important that it's there. But principally, the important aspects of it were people, in one way or another, in those top few, really, they wanted to know they'd been listened to, they'd had a chance to put their case. They felt that you'd gone in there, not just with empathy, but you'd gone in there prepared to listen, and those are the sorts of drivers for satisfaction. The way we were going to report results is, in my austere days of attending this business school prior to this flash building, every time you went to a management course you were taught there was a grid for everything, there's a cube for everything, and this was no exception to the dreaded grid rule. But in those who've seen it will see it looks like a risk management rule and it looks like everything else, and to a large extent it is. But the thing that captivated me somewhat with Colmar Brunton was the idea that we would be able to visualise the way things are done rather than just graphs and spots like that. So it was to try to give us some idea of where we should focus our efforts for the best effects. So, as you can see, there were a lot of priorities for improvement, which had high importance, but equally, it was important to know also what are the strengths you need to maintain. There were some things we're doing well, and so not only did we just find out what was there, we found out exactly, you know, a prioritisation process for dealing with satisfaction. And as I've mentioned to the management team and to the staff of the office, you don't need to read into what was the result this time. You need to read into the results over time. And I'm a very strong believer in research, that research should be longitudinal. You learn very little from a stab in the dark and a point in time. You know, there could have been one specific effect. I remember the year that we had the big breach with ACC complaints, that there's big spikes that were totally irregular. So, you know, you couldn't do those sorts of things. So this is part of a process. I thought you might just be interested to see the satisfaction, I guess, with the process. And you can see there that the idea that it's skewed towards the result is probably quite valid. The complainants feel, you know, that they're on the short end, I guess, whereas the respondents were actually quite high at 78%, higher than I would have anticipated, to be fair. The other one, this is one I put up only because it highlighted to me the key that, look, it's the final decision on how that's expressed to them that actually leads a long way towards whether there's satisfaction or not. So people, they expressed that because they really felt that the final decision, they hadn't really been properly explained to them, that's why their satisfaction was down. If they'd actually understood why that decision, for or against, was there and felt that they'd had a part of that, then the overall satisfaction would have increased remarkably. What else have I got? This was the other one. Respondents clearly with satisfaction. If you're not satisfied, your complaint hasn't been resolved, and in their view it wasn't resolved in a large manner. But the other one I liked was demographics. We'd never had demographics before, and I guess one of my interesting ones was that the education level of complainants, there's sort of an inference that complainants are just your basic belligerers. I know the university system isn't that great, and bachelor's degrees are a lot easier than they were in my day. But I think it is important to understand that a lot of people coming to organisations are no fools. They know how to do some research first. They know what their rights should be, and you should expect them to join into your process as informed participants. What else? Right ahead. This is the part my staff are so interested in because I haven't consulted at all with them about it. The key to research is using it to make change. And the key to our research is to try to bring in my pet theories of lean thinking into the office in its broadest sense across all avenues. And one of those is the investigations process. So I'm busily putting together a plan around how we will incorporate the changes that we learn from our research into all aspects of the complaints investigation process, but equally into my field of where the corporate services support that complaints process to help speed the process through. So I guess I better take some questions because I've got 1 minute, have I? Oh, no, I've got heaps of time. Oh, I can talk for hours. Right. Okay. Yeah, so on the, I guess, yeah, where it is forward from here, the survey is quite lengthy, and it has numerous factors that it draws on, and I think I should have already had it on the website, but I hadn't. But we'll get it up on the website and people can happily have a look at it and take it any way they like. But it does highlight, when I'm doing this roadmap type thing, it highlights how you can make an intervention which will lead to an improvement. And that's, like I say, that's the key to the whole process is improvement. And it's not saying, as I mentioned to staff and stuff, it's not saying what you're doing is wrong. You know, any of these surveys don't say that. In fact, you know, the fact that thousands of people are coming to you to have a complaint investigated in itself is something that's quite an achievement. Because if they really thought you were rubbish, they wouldn't even come in the door. So I don't use this type of research, or I think any sort of research you should use as a stick or something like that. They should all be learning opportunities. And in this case, I was absolutely fascinated. I was fascinated about demographics and, and how we might interpret things differently, how we would deliver services that some of the things that they talk about in there, they say things in there about that it looked like we were just sending out standard letters. So how do we make, because we are sending out some standard letters, how do we make our standard letters look like they're actually addressed to you? That's an important part. Equally, when in one of my previous lives, now that John's out of the room and I can mention a previous employer that he doesn't like me mentioning all the time, when I was the regional manager of accident compensation in the Auckland northern region, I had a rule with my staff that you cannot send a letter that a 10-year-old can't understand. You cannot send a letter that you wouldn't send your mother and expect her to understand. And I think that's really, when we're dealing with complaints, even though these are educated people, and I'd have to say there are certainly some educated people that we met in my previous life as well, but it is important that you manage that expectation process through appropriate communications and appropriate to those people. So those are sort of areas that there are technological tools which will help us in that and make life easier and probably speed up the processes and things that we do, because we hadn't thought of doing them before, but now, because we have some evidential research, we have the impetus for expenditure that might assist those sorts of things. And being that I'm the one that controls expenditure, my projects tend to get fairly well funded. So rather than carry on telling you anything else that'll get me in trouble, please, I'm happy to take any questions.